All right. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 fantasy football offseason preview for the Philadelphia Eagles. I want to start off by saying I don't want anybody to think I'm bashing on certain teams like the Eagles or the Dolphins or anything like that. Like I generally do want pieces of good offenses. That's not the conversation we're having. This is about drafting guys at the top of their ranges of outcomes, their ceilings. And in this case, like the same process that will win me a league will lose me a league. In this case, like sometimes just punting is better. So like your AJ Browns, your Jalen Hurts, that's punting. That's probably going to make me playoffs. Like if I get risky at certain points in the draft, that's the I may win a league because I hit on a guy with a little bit more upside than what the value is. But I miss on that guy very early on. It gets a lot harder. The other thing I want to talk about is hype trains, especially when it comes to like Saquon Barkley. Yeah, I don't understand why certain guys get where they're at, and trying to stay away from guys that are getting hype trained up versus what their risk and their reward is, what their ceilings are, what their floors are, and if they are actually being pushed up ahead of what they are likely to do. So in this case, so the Eagles last year they were 16th in passing yards, 8th in rushing yards, and 7th in points per game. And I can even bring this up that the Dolphins led everybody in points per game. So like we theoretically could get 50 more yards per game out of the Eagles and about like 5 more points per game. The Cowboys were number 1 overall at 29.9. So there is blood to get it out of the stone. In general, we can't talk about steps forward. But if we are talking about steps forward, we also have to talk about steps back. In general, I do think that Jalen Hurts is probably going to have a little bit more passing volume and passing efficiency. So those passing yards and passing touchdowns are going to go up. Those 15 rushing touchdowns, I'm definitely picking the under on if you're wondering about that. So he is going my quarterback 3, quarterback 2 on Fantasy Pros, 25 overall there on Underdog. Let me pull this up real quick. He's going quarterback 2 with an ADP of 37. Remember, this is a best ball league. And then on ESPN, he is going 30 overall, quarterback 2. And I think this is where he should be going. Again, like sometimes it's just smart to take that 20 points a game as like a sub-elite quarterback. I don't know how he hits legendary upside, but I could definitely see that he is in that elite category. Something along those lines is it's a good pick. There may be other guys that I would be more interested, but they're going to cost me because I'm going to have to punt on him to go look at Kyler Murray or Jaden Daniels or Anthony Richardson with the upside. No guarantee that they're going to return on that. Probably a better chance that Jalen Hurts is going to return versus disappoint me, break my heart at that ADP. All right. So moving on from Jalen Hurts, again, the biggest thing with Saquon Barkley coming in, 15 rushing touchdowns is already very difficult. He did 13 with Miles Sanders doing 11 in 2022, so it could happen. But you're probably not going to be getting the positive regression, i.e. more passing touchdowns if he stays relatively consistent to the rushing touchdowns and Barkley gets his. So just kind of pay attention to that. I would expect that as guys get older, they become more passers and less nimbly bimbly. So that's why I would push him up to about 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. I would go up to 30 touchdowns. I do like the 3rd round draft pick of Johnny Wilson. We'll talk about him a little bit later. There's not a lot to talk about with Jalen Hurts, other than I am expecting those rushing touchdowns to go down and a little bit more in the passing game overall as they become more of a balanced offense. So the big news, Saquon Barkley, 3 years, $37 million coming over from the Giants. I'm not concerned about the age. Remember, there's 2 age apexes. There's the one where we have like peak efficiency and production. That's 26. The other one, they can be very productive at 27 and 28. So I'm not as worried about that in general. We'll talk about the stuff that I am concerned about when it comes down to this. So he's going, he is my running back 9. He is 6 on Fantasy Pros, 14 overall. ESPN, he's going 10 overall, running back 5. And on Underdog, he's going running back 5, 15.6 overall with the ADP. So here is the problem with Barkley and those hype trains. So last year, if we combine Swift, Gainwell, and Hurts and those 510 carries that the Eagles had, there's only 40 vacated carries left over after all of that, right? So we can generally think that Barkley's going to get about 250 carries. And if we jump his efficiency all the way up to 5, which he hasn't done since he was a rookie in the league, that's going to give him about 1,250 yards in the rushing game. If we give him a ridiculously high 15 rushing touchdowns, again, because we're expecting those regression from Jalen Hurts, and then we give him about 300 receiving yards to go along with 40 receptions. In half point PPR, that's going to give you 265 points ish. Running back 7-ish points per game. You're looking at like running back 12, right? That ain't going to win you a league at those ADPs. That's just generally thinking like I would feel better about like a mid-second round draft pick to an early third. That's what I would be thinking at those prices. Now, if we do something a little bit crazy and we bump Saquon all the way up to 300 carries, which apples to apples would have made him the number one guy in rushing attempts this last year over Derrick Henry, and we keep him at that 5 yards per carry, we can get him up to like 1,500 yards, and then we also have to bump him up another 200 receiving yards, and that would make him running back 2. So again, the meta right now is going to be punting the running back position and the quarterback position and the tight end position, and just taking easy layup wide receivers to make our playoffs early on in the draft. That's just the best way to do it overall. I don't know how you get this season from Saquon, especially in a team that has not shown to throw to running backs in the design passing game last year. DeAndre Swift, 39 receptions, 214 yards. Miles Sanders, 2022, 20 receptions, 78 yards. Kenny Gainwell last year, 30 receptions, 183. So you'd have to take all of that DeAndre Swift work, all of that Kenny Gainwell work, and just give it to Barkley. Everything has to go to Barkley. Those Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns, the Kenny Gainwell receiving work, the DeAndre Swift receiving work, and then all of the Kenny Gainwell and all of DeAndre Swift rushing work all have to go to Barkley for him to be able to return on investment at the prices that he's going on. That's just something to be paying attention to. Now, the Eagles have always kind of run this like running back by committee. Last year, Kenny Gainwell, 364 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns to go along with 37 targets, 30 receptions, 183 receiving. I don't necessarily see him going away. And the bigger problem is it doesn't really matter if he goes away. The Eagles went out and they drafted Will Shipley, running back from Clemson, in the 4th round of the draft. That means he's going to make the roster. He's probably going to have a role. I don't necessarily see him being the thumper, but I could definitely see him being somewhere that in that change of pace or receiving work. And again, Barkley, we need the design receiving work to go to running backs for them to be special from a fantasy perspective. So I don't know how that's going to happen in general overall in this. So I bring up our Miles Sanders shares from 2022. This is the floor. 259 rush attempts, 1,269 yards rushing. That's 4.9, by the way. We're expecting Barkley to get like 5.0. And then 11 rushing touchdowns. 20 receptions, 78 yards. Like, this is Barkley's floor. This is probably a lot closer to the middle of our expectations. The over underline for Barkley is, again, that Miles Sanders 2022 season. I'm not spending running back 6 to find that out. I would feel better about spending running back 9 and expecting to get burned at this point. So, you run your roster the way that you want to. I'm not touching Saquon Barkley with your roster this year. All right, moving on to the one last thing I want to talk about is Tyrion Davis-Price, Kendall Milton, and Lou Nichols. They're the bigger backs on their roster right now going into the offseason. So Lewis Nichols, 7th round draft pick from the Packers last year. Kendall Milton, he's an undrafted free agent from Georgia. He's a 4.6 40 guy. And Tyrion Davis-Price, he's a cast off from the 49ers, 3rd round draft pick. If Barkley goes down, I don't think that Shipley or Gainwell are going to be like priority handcuffs at that point. This is something to break down. One of these other guys I could maybe expect to take in that grinder type of role that we saw DeAndre Swift have last year. Barkley would be the guy that I would expect maybe has the ability to take that full bell cow. All right. Wide receiver room. So if you're new to the channel, I do not like guys that cannibalize each other when it comes to opportunities. I don't know why AJ Brown and Brandon Ayuk aren't necessarily like right next to each other in ADP. We're going to talk about that here in a second. He is my wide receiver 11 because of that cannibalization of opportunities that's going to go on. Wide receiver 6 overall on Fantasy Pros, 9 overall ADP on Underdog. He's going out wide receiver 7 with an ADP of 10. ESPN, he is going at wide receiver 6, 12 overall. Again, this is where he should be going. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying I don't know how he returns on that to get a little bit more out of anything else than what I'm paying for. He is a good pick. This is what we talk about. I would probably be taking him and punting than trying to reach on a Barkley at this point in the draft. Like, I like Garrett Wilson a little bit more. He's probably a little bit riskier at this point, but overall, like, hey, I could just see taking Barkley and saying that, like, relative, you're looking at that over underline of what he did in 2023. I find it a little difficult that you're going to get some type of predictive positive regression, that jump in the passing game, or the passing touchdowns. Not going to be the red zone target for the team. They have Dallas Goedert, they have Saquon Barkley, and they brought in Johnny Wilson. I don't know how he magically becomes the guy that they just start peppering with touchdowns once they get in the, or peppering with opportunities once they get in the red zone. Just don't see how that happens, which means he's not going to take that step forward in the passing touchdown department, and it's going to get hard for him to jump up into this like CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown type of range of guy. Like, it's just how it goes. And then, even if we give that step forward when it comes to Jalen Hurts in the passing game, and it all goes to AJ Brown, then we can start talking about him taking that jump into that next tier. You're drafting his middle range of outcomes, probably, or you're drafting his ceiling. Very little chance that he's going to take a step forward. You're more than likely going to have the opportunity to get your heart broken at where he's going. But it's a good pick. It's solid. It's a punt. Moving on to DeVonta Smith. Or the other thing I want to talk about with AJ Brown, I did talk about this before, is where Brandon Ayuk is going because of those cannibalization of targets. Remember, the 49ers have roughly 400 more passing yards from last year to this year. So where Brandon Ayuk is going is probably about where AJ Brown should be going, because they're both going to have a lot of heavy competition for targets, and they're going to have to be high efficiency guys. So Brandon Ayuk on ESPN is going as wide receiver 17, 38 overall. So this is something to be thinking of when it comes to trying to match these guys apples to apples. On Fantasy Pros, he's going closer to wide receiver 13, 19 overall. So again, like, I don't know why AJ Brown is being hype trained up that much further, other than maybe he gets those less efficient targets and he's going to have higher receptions than Ayuk is. I don't understand that. It's something to be thinking about. So moving on to DeVonta Smith. Again, like, I think he's safe. He is going as my wide receiver 22. He's going 21 overall on Fantasy Pros, 36 overall. And then on ESPN, he's going 42 overall, wide receiver 21. On Underdog, he's going wide receiver 22, ADP of 31.8. That's a little high to me. But again, Best Ball League, wide receiver meta. We can talk about the ifs, buts, and maybes of Deontay Smith being able to win you a league if there's an AJ Brown injury. Other than that, like, trying to figure out a way that we can get that increase in receiving touchdowns, probably not going to happen, because he's not going to be the guy that they target. And then trying to get more out of the receiving game, unless we get this massive step forward overall in the passing game, his over underline is going to be relatively somewhere between that 2022 season and that 2023 season, like 120 targets, 80 to 90 receptions, somewhere between like around 1,100 yards receiving and probably like 7 touchdowns. That's what you're looking at when it comes to DeVonta Smith. Again, another safe guy. I like it. Other guys I would probably be looking at going in a different direction on, but there's not a lot to say about this. The big issue in all this would be Johnny Wilson, the 6th round pick out of Florida State. I usually do not rank guys before we know what their role is, that they're going to make the roster and stuff like that. Like, he's a 6th round draft pick. I don't like wild speculation, but he just fits so well. He's a 4'6" guy, 6'6", 228, 4'5" at his pro day. I do like the chance that he's going to be the red zone contested catch guy. They did bring in Julio Jones last year to try and maybe get this. So I would not be surprised that this is what his role is going to be in the offense. So on Fantasy Pros, he's wide receiver 129, 374 overall. I have him as my wide receiver 66. He's not listed on ESPN, and on Underdog, he's 215 ADP, wide receiver 109. And the other thing I would talk about in this case would be like wherever Keon Coleman's going, and this is kind of funny because they're both from that Florida State offense, is probably about where we should be looking at the possibility of Johnny Wilson going. So if everybody's hype training Keon Coleman up, I don't understand why we wouldn't be already hype training Johnny Wilson up. And there's a couple other things. Devontae Parker, I didn't even remember that he signed with the Eagles. So he retired a couple days ago with the Eagles. They put him on the reserve retired list. The 6th round draft pick, Aeneas Smith, or 5th round draft pick, Aeneas Smith from Texas A&M. He's more of a slot only guy. So there's a possibility that they're going to bring him in to play the slot. And then DeVonta Smith and AJ Brown are going to have to play the X and the Z. I will say this about Aeneas Smith. He's probably more of a kick returner guy. I think he led all of college football with return yards last year. So I don't even know if he's going to necessarily make the team or be involved in the passing game overall. Johnny Wilson would be the guy that I would expect to play that X position. And again, probably like 600 to 800 yards and that like 6 to 8 touchdowns I would be expecting out of him if he earns that role in this offense. And that may definitely hurt your DeVonta Smith and AJ Brown shares if that's what he's rolling at. And like I said, trying to figure out where Keon Coleman is going. I probably should have done that ahead of time, but I am super prepared as always as I go hunt these guys down. Because I was watching, I think it was I was watching a podcast on fantasy football the other day, and they were talking that Keon Coleman's already getting hype trained up. I haven't seen it yet, so I am waiting on that to occur, that he's going to be like really pushed up the board. They're saying that he was in the range on the snob leagues of there's Keon Coleman, wide receiver 49 overall on ESPN. So he's in the range of Lad McConkey, and I don't understand that in the first place. But if that's where he is, I would think that Johnny Wilson will end up being right around the same range of Keon Coleman. If unless Keon Coleman really gets pushed up into the wide receiver 20 type range. So anyway, moving on to the tight end room. This is another guy. I wouldn't be drafting Dallas Goedert with your roster. I think he's ridiculously overvalued. I don't know how he does anything. You're just trying to get a piece of a good offense at this point. He is my tight end 21. I actually moved him down after breaking down the Eagles at this point. He's going tight end 11 on Fantasy Pros, 101 overall. On ESPN, he's going 89, tight end 11. I don't even know how he's in the same range as Kyle Pitts and Jake Ferguson at this point. And then on Underdog, he's going 113 ADP, tight end 12. So to break this down, he played 14 games last year. He averaged 42 points per game, had three receiving touchdowns. That would have been 12 in tight end 12 in points per game. And if we actually do the thing that I don't like to do, where we project out if he played all 17 games, that would have meant he finished as tight end 10 overall in the season. So like he's going at tight end 11. And that's with potentially Barkley coming in and Johnny Wilson coming in this offense. So yeah, if you're drafting Dallas Goedert, you're not even punting. you're actively trying to lose your league at this point. So that's all I have to say. And then to finish this all off with the tight end room, they re-signed Albert O. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the last name. He is a former, or his draft combine, he was a 4.47 guy. So remember, high athletic tight ends on second contracts, that would tick the boxes of Albert O. We've been waiting for him to break out. Doesn't mean that he's good at football. That's not what I'm saying. But I could definitely see as the pass receiver, I can see him eating into that role a little bit with Dallas Goedert. They also brought in CJ Azuma, the blocking tight end, I think from the Bengals last year. So there's a little bit to be paying attention when it comes down to if Albert O is able to finally become fantasy relevant, something we've been looking for that breakout to happen. So anyway, I think that's all about what I got for today. And yeah,